So is distance in the eye of the beholder, or is it in the mind of the perceiver? Let's try a thought experiment. Let's imagine you're sitting in a chair and you're looking at a vast white wall. This wall expands far above you, far below you, and off to each side. Now, also in front of you, between yourself and the wall, there's a frame of curtains, so you can only see a certain portion of that wall, perhaps a 10 by 10 foot portion of this white wall. And that's all you can see. You can't see the floor, you can't see the ceiling, and you can't see any other walls. So now let's say there's a black spot in the middle of that wall. So you see a black spot, and then you see a white wall surrounding it. And then the curtains prevent you from seeing anything in the periphery. So based on seeing the black spot and the white wall, can you tell if that white wall is 10 feet in front of you and the black spot is perhaps 3 or 4 feet across? Or can you tell if that white wall is 100 feet away from you and you're looking at a vast wall that's hundreds of feet tall and you're looking at a black spot that's 100 or more feet wide? What is it about the visual experience of the black on white, the spot in the wall, that actually tells you where it is? Is it close or far? Is there anything intrinsic to the visual experience itself that actually tells you anything about distance? The answer is no. So what would you need to know to ascertain how far away that is? You'd have to have some knowledge about the size of the room. You'd have to be able to see the floor or the ceiling and where it connects to the wall. You'd have to have walked out toward that wall before and come back to have a sense of how distant it is. Or perhaps you'd need to pull in some data from your voice reflecting off the wall to get a sense of whether it's close or far. But in the visual experience itself, there's actually nothing that tells you anything about distance. So when we say, in the scene, there's only the scene, or in seeing, there's only what's seen, or seeing sees, any of these phrases or pointings are pointing to this truth that in the visual experience itself, in the raw visual experience, there's no distance. It's not far or near. This can be practiced with anything in your visual field. It's just imperative that you recognize how quickly the mind starts thinking about it, starts associating it with other visual experiences, memories, understandings about the room you're in, or the other objects in the room. That's all thought. But if you're able to actually stay in the visual experience primarily, you'll find that there is no distance. There's no separation between you as the knower or seer and that which is seen. And when that becomes obvious, it's also clear that there's no process of seeing. There's just that. There's no one doing it. There's nothing on the other end of the seeing. It's just the visual experience just as it is. It's not in a place. It's not near or far. It's not coming or going. It's not arising or disappearing. It has no specific texture. It's not in relation to you or anything else. This is the pure experience of a sense, the non-dual experience. Now, I recently answered a 3-part question someone put on one of my videos about working with the visual field. And it was actually Monica that asked the question, someone I recently have interviewed. If you haven't checked out her video, check it out. It's really good. So she asked a few questions. One is, when working with the visual field, is it best to have the eyes open or closed? So generally speaking, when you're meditating, you can try it both ways. There's no exact right answer. Sometimes maybe it's better to meditate with the eyes closed, other times perhaps open, and some people just prefer it one way or the other. Now, when you're investigating specific sense fields, for instance, it can be helpful to focus on that sense. So the visual field with your eyes open may be easier. Now, with your eyes closed, there's still a visual phenomena. There's still a visual experience. It's the shades behind your eyelids. So it may look brownish or reddish or sort of dark, depending on the light on the other side. But there is a visual experience there. We just often ignore it. We don't pay attention to it. When we close our eyes, we often either drift into thought or listen to sounds or feel the sensations in the body. But you can just as easily tune your attention to the visual experience as well. So eyes closed or open is fine. Now, when you're starting to discern the difference between the overlay the mind puts over the visual field, which I described at the beginning of the video, it's the thoughts and ideas about distance, comparison, relationship, solidity, location. When you start investigating that versus the actual raw visual experience, it can be helpful to actually alternate between eyes open and eyes closed. Because when you open your eyes, what do you see? You see colors, forms, shapes coming into immediate experience. When you close your eyes, all of that's gone. Anything remaining about that, about the room you just were observing, is likely thought, right? What was there, objects, labels, locations, what your history is with that location, and so forth. That's all thought. So you can see the difference by actually opening your eyes, just taking in what's there, raw data, closing your eyes and seeing what's the afterglow. What is the mind saying about that? And realizing that's all thought. That's not actually there in the visual experience. So it can be helpful to open and close the eyes periodically to compare when you're investigating the nature of the mental visual construct versus the actual visual experience. Another question she asked is it best to work in one sense field or to work in various sense fields and rotate through them? So again, you'll find your own way with this, try different things, but generally speaking, it's a bit easier with sound. It's also often easier with sensations in the body. Now this may really depend, as far as the body, may really depend on how you're feeling emotionally. If you're feeling triggered, if you're feeling contracted, it may be much harder. But if you're feeling relaxed, you might find it's about as easy to place your attention in the body sensations, the pure sensations of the body, as it is with the sound field. Now, generally speaking, the visual field is more tricky and takes a little bit longer to clarify in this way because the dualistic construct, the dimensionality of the visual field, is a pretty potent overlay. It's pretty strong and it's got a lot of momentum to it. A lot of mental processing goes into constructing a three-dimensional world. So I do recommend working with the different senses, but spending some consistent time in one sense can really give you a good feel for how it is experienced when there's no subject and object in that sense field. And often by moving your attention to another sense field after spending some time there, you sort of feel that overlap. You can kind of see how in the visual field, it also has that locationlessness, that intimacy. I'm over here and that is over there, being nothing but a mental construct. So it can be helpful to actually rotate in that way, but to do it very quickly, rotating through the senses, you might just sort of end up in your head. So I would recommend that. Now, when you're working in the visual field, it's often helpful to just work with one object for a while, like one thing in front of your face, like I was describing the black spot on the white wall. The simplicity of that helps you recognize that really there's no data there that's telling you it's far or near, and so forth. And so that helps you recognize what the difference between a thought and the visual experience is. Once you recognize that, you get better at keeping attention in the visual experience in its raw form. And then you have a much better chance of realization. Realization is when there's a literal shift in the way you experience the dimensions, the way you experience distance, space, separation. It's a fundamental shift that doesn't unshift. It's a change that can't go back in a sense, because there's nothing to go back to a dualistic identity, because nothing like that ever existed. It's very clear at that point. So the third question she asked, I've already sort of touched on, and that is the body sense sometimes can feel challenging because when we put our attention there, it really feels like I'm the awareness up here. I'm the consciousness aware of that body. Even though it's close, it may still feel like it's down there somewhere. Like the mind is up around the head and the body is some separate thing, the sensations in the body. And if we're really triggered, we may not want to let our attention go into the body. It may want to really pull back up into the mind, into thoughts. So as I mentioned, if you're more relaxed, perhaps you've done some somatic exercise, yoga or something physical, been meditating quite a while. In those states, it's much easier to just let your attention just drift down into the body, or just find your attention in the body space, the sensations, which ends up helping to dissolve the mental experience of a body, or the cognitive belief that there's a physical body here, or that there's a physical body in a world here. So those are just some basic pointers, but of course you can find your own way to do a lot of this as well. The key is genuine curiosity, exploration, and actually taking the time to do this. Looking directly at what it is that makes you feel like you're someone in here and there's something out there. There's a subject, which is consciousness, awareness, or a distinct person, and then there's everything out there it's aware of, objects, experiences, phenomena. Where are you getting that data? Where is that coming from? Is it even there at all? That kind of query and really looking for it in a specific way can be tremendously helpful.